The Legend of the Night Spinner, Episode 2, The Forgotten Studio. For weeks, Joris had tried to forget what happened that night in the woods, but it was impossible. Every time he approached the Veluwe woods, he felt the shiver run down his spine, a tiny thread of fear that warned him that some secrets would never be laid to rest. Yet something drew him back, a mixture of curiosity and an undeniable uneasiness. He had to know where the woman had come from, who she was, and why the woods seemed so alive when she appeared. One evening, his search led him to an old, half dilapidated cottage on the edge of a small village nestled close to the woods where he had met her. He thought it best to continue his search for the mysterious woman in the darkness. The cottage windows were covered with dust and cobwebs, and the door creaked heavily on its hinge as he carefully opened it and stepped inside. It felt like walking through a time capsule. Forgotten objects lay everywhere: old newspapers, yellowed letters, a broken chair that still seemed to cast its own shadow in the moonlight. And there, in the back room of the house, lay the studio. A table covered in felted wool, ravaged by vermin, half-finished scarves, sweaters, and other unfinished projects, now also riddled with holes from the passage of time. In the corner stood an old wooden spinning wheel, so brittle it seemed it would crumble at the slightest touch. Iron knitting needles were also scattered throughout the studio, those same gleaming, almost sacred needles Joris had seen in her hands that night. It seemed as if the room was still alive with her presence. A cold draught caressed his face, as if someone were observing him from behind. Joris noticed something remarkable. On the table lay an unfinished scarf, but the yarn looked recently made and was pristine, untouched by weather, time, or vermin. It was as if someone had frozen the moment and challenged him to discover what was happening here. Then he heard the soft rustle of a thread being pulled across the wooden floor. His heart pounded in his throat. He turned slowly, but there was no one. Only the small, dilapidated studio, silent and expectant, and the mist from outside creeping in like a veil through the broken door. He couldn't resist the temptation. Carefully, he picked up a knitting needle. The touch felt cold, almost alive. He remembered the whisper in the woods. "Would you like me to spin for you?" The words seemed everywhere now, in the creaking of the floorboards, in the rustling of the wind through the window, and in the nighttime sounds that seemed to come from the woods next to the cottage. Joris felt a mixture of fear and fascination. He knew he was crossing a line that was never meant to be crossed, and then, suddenly, the memory flashed through his mind like a bright flash of light. She had always been lonely. Her name was Elise, a young woman known in the village for her quiet presence and her skill with wool. In her young adult years, she had spent hours counting stitches, creating patterns only she could understand. But there had always been a dark edge to her smile, a hidden frustration that had built up over the years in her lonely home. One evening, just before everything changed, a friend from the village had visited her. He had entered her back room studio and slowly looked around. He had picked up her knitting needles, admired her patterns, and laughed at a flaw in a scarf she had never intended to show, but which she still kept on her work table. Elise felt betrayed, belittled, and a fierce rage welled up inside her. That same night, the unthinkable happened, an act so sudden and cruel that she would never breathe again in the world of the living. The iron knitting needles had become both her revenge and her end. Joris sank into an old wooden chair and ran his hands over the scarf, which seemed completely intact. It was as if he were touching Elise's own memories. Every fiber seemed to echo her emotions: sadness, anger, longing, but also a bizarre beauty that fascinated and frightened him simultaneously. He heard the soft whispers again, subtle, like the creaking of the floorboards. Do you want me to spin for you? This time, the words seemed to come from every corner of the house, a multiple presence that closed him in. Joris felt the fibers slowly come to life, gracefully, like living threads encircling his hand. His eye fell on a small hole in the scarf. Could this be the mistake the village friend had marked Elisa about? A mist arose. Threads began to form in the air from the fog. His heart pounded faster, and he realized he was not alone any longer. The studio breathed, lived, and something from the past wanted to connect with him. And then, in a flash of panic and fascination, he saw it. A portrait, in the mist, of threads beginning to form above the table. The face was feminine, but it seemed larger than life itself. Elise. Her eyes looked straight at him, hollow and deep, yet filled with an intense emotion he couldn't contain. Her hands moved, but not towards the table. They seemed to float freely. Suddenly, the knitting needles began to dance around him, as if guided by an invisible force. Joris knew he had gone too far in his search for her. He wanted to run, but the door seemed further away than when he entered, as if the studio had swallowed him whole. The threads from the mist and around Elise's portrait shot quickly across the table and floor toward him, around his ankles, slowly tightening and almost strangling him, and he felt the presence of someone no longer alive, but still longing to create, of someone who wanted to capture, to show her strength and voice. A cold voice whispered close to his ear, "You can't leave. My work isn't done yet." This story continues in the next episode. Will you still keep listening?